Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Omega Conversations. My name is Carol Donahoe, and I'm the program director here at Omega. And today we are joined by our good friends, New York Times bestselling authors, and our go-to relationship experts, Harville Hendrix and LaKelly Hunt. When we were discussing a topic for today, Harville suggested, why don't we look at something that's really prevalent out there in the world, but perhaps we're not all having conversations about. And so we decided that we're going to start this conversation talking about loneliness, because it's something that is affecting a large number of people. And actually, during this pandemic, it's only grown more. Studies have shown that chronic loneliness has clear links to health issues, depression, anxiety, self-harm, heart conditions, and substance abuse. And with serious illnesses, they say that people without a social support network around them, they have lower chances of full recovery than people who have a strong network around them. In January, a report from Cigna, the health insurer, suggested that actually prior to COVID-19, more than 60% of adult Americans said that they suffered from some level of loneliness. And that has only increased, obviously, in this last year. So we want to tackle that a little bit. We want to talk about it, address it from a few angles, and then we're going to give you all a few minutes to do some sharing. What came up for you when you heard us talking about a particular topic? If it's about children and the stress that they have, or any issues of your own. And then after that will be Q&A. So when we do the sharing, really what we'd like is that what you're hearing from Harville and Helen, that period of time, and I'll tell you what the break is between the two, but that period of time that you just come on and say, when I heard you talking about this particular thing, this is how I feel it reflecting in my life. And then after that, we'll have a period of Q&A that you can ask direct questions to Harville and Helen, and I'll be your mediator for that. I'll be helping you with that. So let's jump in and bring Harville and Helen onto the screen with us. And just first of all, Helen, hi. We saw Harville a little earlier, so it's nice to see you two together. And thank you so much for being here. What we're seeing in this past year, and maybe this is a blessing of what's come out of the pandemic, but mental health is really being highlighted in the mainstream media a lot more. And there is a desire to change the stigma of mental health struggles that people have had and how they've been viewed in the past. There is a desire to normalize it and validate the feelings that people are having. So can you speak a little bit to that, how we can normalize and validate both for ourselves and for others in our lives some of the feelings that we might be having during this year of a pandemic?
Well, I'll give it a try. Helen and I have talked about about this and have been talking about it before on other webinars and blogs and so forth. That the experience that people are having is the problem of confinement, of being quarantined, of that increasing stress, and the not being able to interact with people they know and care about and love, or work colleagues or whatever, is increasing the sense of loneliness that we're talking about. And did you say the number was 60% from Sigma or 16%?
660 prior to COVID.
Zero. Yeah, I thought that was the right number. Um, so I think what I'd like to address is, why in the world does loneliness such a big problem for human beings? Because it's a big problem whether we're having a crisis or not. the COVID crisis and putting us into even more isolated situations. And so I'd like to ask that question and also address what Helen and I would think is a response to the question. I like to say I want to respond to the question. I may not have the right answer, but at least this is my response to the question. And here's what we think. And I think you would agree with this, and you'll chime in with your own thoughts about this. For generations, we have thought that human beings were autonomous and independent and self-sufficient. And in fact,
or that's the goal, that mental health, the goal was self-sufficiency, self-reliance.
Well, that was health too. That was a healthy person was autonomous.
That's who you needed to become.
Was autonomous, independent, and self-sufficient. And if you weren't that, then you went to therapy, and you went to therapy to become autonomous, independent, and self-sufficient. But that was also the goal. But what is in that is a view of who human beings are, which is that they are not connected to other human beings at an intrinsic level. What we have been learning in the past, I would say now 25 years, beginning in the late 90s and early 2000, a whole new story is evolving, which is that human beings are social creatures, that we are not autonomous creatures, we are relational creatures, and that we have been misnamed and trying to become something that we're not for a couple of hundred years with the focus on the individual. But when we move, and this has come, much of it's come out of brain research, where they're learning that we also have a social brain, that the brain is created by our interactions with other people, it's changed by our interactions with other people. So we're now saying the essence of being human is to be in relationship with other humans. And that's not a need that we have to meet, it's a reality. And when we're not experiencing that connecting that is our nature, then we get sick. Then we feel the loss, we feel the cutoff. The autonomy that we thought was our goal becomes our problem. And that, so that when we look at the 60% number, the answer to that has to be that connecting has broken down for most people, at least in the technological world. Some people say that a part of that is technology, the cell phone, Zoom, computers, all the kind of indirect ways that people connect rather than personal and direct ways. And that may be the case, but what we do know is there's more use of that technology. More and more people use that technology, which says we want to connect, but we still don't know how. And I don't think the technology is the problem. I think the problem is knowing how to connect to another human being so that you feel safe with that person and seen by that person, and can make yourself safe for that person and be seen by that person. So what happens with COVID is you have an acceleration, an amplification of an already normal condition. The need to be in connection, the need to be in a relationship is normal. When you want to be with others, that's normal. If you want some time off from others, that's normal, but that's not usually what you want much of. You like a break, but you still want to know they're around. It's like the kid who wants to come touch base with the caretaker and then can go off and play, but they want to be sure the caretaker's there when they come back. That the relationship is primary and our autonomy is secondary. So it is very normal to feel a loneliness, since our nature is to be in connection with other human beings. When we don't know how to do it through technology, and when it gets amplified by COVID, and we're now into lockdown. So we'll talk about, well, what do you do about it in a few minutes, but I just want to answer that question, that it is normal to feel the stress of being alone, especially when you don't want to, and the experience of loneliness has to do with underneath the whole phenomenon of I'm lonely is I would like to be connected. In other words, we express what our nature is by our objection to what we're experiencing, when we're not experiencing our nature, when we are separated and we can't get together. So that's sort of a long-winded answer to the question of can you normalize this? And the answer is absolutely yes.
That's great. Helen, did you want to add anything to that or?
Well, I think to say that for the first time in the history of the world, the relational sciences are teachable. And it's due to the breakthroughs in the neurosciences in the 1990s. Many people give that as the reason that now we can teach people how to be connected. Everyone for eons has said, oh, ain't love great? Or it's so great to be in love, or it's so great. And everyone should be in love and everyone should be connected. But we didn't know how to teach it. And that's our specialty. So in this hour with you, Carol, we can give you some points about that. Because people would do it if they knew what to do.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love the tools idea. It's something else that's interesting, Harville, when you were saying about the technology, in this same study, the group with the highest number of people feeling lonely were the 18 to 25-year-olds who are on technology most of the time. The numbers for them were 79%. And then as you went older and older and older, the numbers actually, there was less loneliness, ironically. So I thought that was interesting. And I think there could be a direct connection to technology.
And let me just comment and just to underline again what I was saying, the fact that so many people are on technology, texting and calling, is an indication of the desire to be in relationship. And the technology doesn't satisfy that desire, but it amplifies the fact that it is our deepest need. What we need to do is figure out ways that we can use technology to connect, because we're going to have technology for as long as we have human beings now, because that's just the way human beings work, is we create something and then we create more of that, from everything from the first weapon that helped us chase a rabbit and have it for dinner by throwing a rock. We've been using technology for millions of years. We're going to continue to do it. But the technology, the first phases of any technology are problematic. The second phase of the technology is to integrate it in, to amplify the human situation instead of diminish it. So what we have to do is use what we now know is a desire and a technology to meet that desire. And I think there are ways to do that that we haven't figured out yet.
Yeah. Well, to go along with this last conversation about the kids having a higher level, or young adults, I would say, but there are people out there that have children, maybe even younger children, and adults and children express their stress in different ways. So this is a two-part question. For parents or caretakers, first, how do we recognize that a child is in a stressful situation or is feeling lonely or isolated? And then how can we help them to cope with those feelings?
Yeah. So shall I start? You want to start with that?
I think you said you were going to start.
Well, I think to recognize that the child is in a stressful situation, that one of the clues always is that there's some change in the child's behavior. And there are only two ways a child's behavior can change. And one is they become retiring, withdrawing, quieter, less interactive than they usually are. So that's a clue that something's going on that they're not being able to deal with. And this is a normal thing to happen for some of us who operate out of what we call the parasympathetic side of our autonomic nervous system. When we get upset, we go quiet. Then there's another group of children who are playing normally or being normal and acting normal, but all of a sudden their behavior escalates. They become hyperactive and hyper complaining and moving around, or making some sort of stress signals. And that means they're activating the sympathetic side of the autonomic nervous system, which is an increase of energy. So anytime there's a change in the normal in the behavior, you know that a stress event has occurred, or a stress event is occurring, or in some cases stress memories are happening, but usually it's a current stress that's producing changes in the child's level of anxiety, and they're trying to manage that by escalating their energy or by suppressing their energy.
So I'll add, if that's
Sure.
okay. Um, so Carol, you might want to write this down. There's a woman named Adrienne Kennedy. Adrienne Kennedy, Dr. Adrienne Kennedy, and she had been elected for the second time chair of the board of NAMI, the National Alliance of Mentally Ill.
Mm-hmm.
And she came into our training program to learn about safe conversations. And for those of you who don't know, Harville and I teach imagotherapy, but Harville also wants this out of the clinic and into the public. It's a dialogue process that's for everybody, and not just people seeking therapy. And after she went into the training, she said, "Oh my goodness, if safe conversations was in the world, this would prevent mental illness." And she told us, we talked to her the next month, and she said, "Guess what? I was having lunch with my granddaughter, and her parents had gone through a divorce. And I think it was a 12-year-old granddaughter, and I think it was the mom, and then Adrienne Kennedy. And they were having lunch, and Adrienne said that she asked her granddaughter a question, and the granddaughter answered it sort of quietly. And Adrienne was about to go on and then say her thoughts and tell her to give a lot of points. And she said, "Oh, I think I'll mirror her and validate and say, is there more about that? And see if she wants to say more about that instead of going on to the next thing." And she told us, this is not prepared, but remember when she told us, every time she said, "Is there more about that?" she just mirrored her granddaughter. She said her granddaughter began to open up. The first thing was a 5-sentence thing, and she said, "What is there? Let me see if I got it." And she mirrored her and said, "Is there more?" The granddaughter went this, and granddaughter then, "Is there more?" And it's so good to ask questions. And Adrienne said that at that lunch, she, for the first time, discovered who her granddaughter was. Adrienne Kennedy is used to giving people answers and solutions, and she wasn't used to asking questions. And she said, "Wow, at home, we ought to be asking questions more of each other. Ask questions of your kids, and don't just ask one, ask 2 or 3, and they begin to open up like a flower. They're dying for someone to say, 'How are you feeling?' and is there more about that?"
That's beautiful. Oh, thank you. For those of you that don't know, Harper and Helen actually have 6 kids, right? And 6 grandkids.
Yes.
Yeah, so they're well experienced in the kids world. And I also just want to give a shout out to Safe Conversations, because I remember when they started it, one of the things that was really so moving to me about the two of you, you're very generous, and you've been very generous to Omega, but I really felt like when you first started these conversations, you were going out to churches and really making them available for people who couldn't afford to come to the regular classes and do that. And I just really honor you for your generosity and your kindness. Yeah. And your desire to get this out in the world so we all do better at this listening rather than knowing all the answers, right?
Right.
Thank you, Carol.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, it's a good time for us to be practicing some healthy coping skills ourselves. I feel like you just gave us one there, Helen. But do you have some ideas that you can share with the adults on how they might be coping with what's going on for them right now?
Yeah, you want to continue with that or pick up on that?
Whichever.
Okay.
Do you
So
have
I'll
something?
go ahead.
Because
Yeah,
I have several things to say, but
Okay.
whenever.
Okay. Well, why don't I start, and
Okay.
then you come in and fill out all the things that I
Okay.
don't get,
Okay.
leave out or don't get right. Well, where I would start is where you stopped, which is that and where we started this, that if you consider, and we do, that we are social creatures, that means that our relationship with other human beings is of primary importance. And then the question is, what makes that relationship uh, uh, satisfying and even necessary and functional? And that is what Helen was talking about with this grandmother listening actively to her granddaughter. That and Helen, you give this lecture, so you can amplify this, but I'll just get it started so you know what I'm referring to. When Helen and I are lecturing, she often talks about how our culture has made it a practice and a policy to reward people who can talk. So you give speeches, and in school you get speech classes, and you're supposed to learn how to talk so that you can be a CEO. You learn how to talk. But nobody, and you get rewards.
And we
for
also
talking.
have a culture that rewards the best.
And rewards the best.
And so all of us in our minds, well, we need to be the best.
Yeah.
And so I hope I'm better than so-and-so at so-and-so, because you get rewards and attention.
Well, I think the piece of
If
this
you're the best.
that I like that you say, so I'll say it for you and you can amplify it, is, but nobody rewards you for listening. It's not a skill in a curriculum of any academic institution that we know of, unless you're in the arts and you're learning to be a movie star, or you're in a program where you know that being able to give presentations is going to be important for your career.
And the listening rate sucks. The accuracy rate.
But
you think you've heard someone, but
yeah,
not necessarily accurately.
And in all of the training
Excuse me for saying sucks. I really don't say that very often. But
yeah, well, all of the training that goes on in public life for most careers that have to do at all with talking do not have a parallel course in listening. And one of the things that you will discover if you talk to salespeople who learn this on the job is that the best way to make a sale is not to talk, but to listen to the customer and ask the customer questions and be curious about what the customer thinks. And that talking will turn the customer off, but listening will help. So that's a kind of strategy for the use of listening. But what Helen and I are interested in is the generic value of listening. And there's a real difference between hearing something and listening to something. And we distinguish that by hearing is something comes to your ear, but it doesn't go in. You just hear it. But listening is that comes to your ear. It does go inside your own intellectual inner world and becomes a new piece of data for you. In other words, when you listen, it changes you because you're allowing new information into your library of information. So so that's sort of a setup. But what we would say, every human being needs to be listened to. It's a way of, it's interesting that being heard is often also referred to by people as being seen. It's like when you mirror somebody back and you said back to them what you really heard them say, they say, well, gee, thank you. I feel seen when you say that back to me. That there's a kind of auditory visual merger of being heard and seen at the same time. And if you had an fMRI, put them in an fMRI machine or put a measurement device on their brain, you would notice that when a person experiences being listened to, their heart rate will go down, the heart rate level, the pace of the heart rate, their anxiety level will go down, their galvanic skin responses. If you have the thing on your skin, the meter will drop. And all which means is that when you're being listened to, you feel safe. When you're not being listened to, you're not sure if you're safe. So you have to do something about that to test it out in some way. And here's the thing. When you feel safe, then all those features that you talked about mental health and its contribution to our physical health, mental health, longevity, heart attack, and disease rate and all that, listening is what creates the safety that contributes to the increased immune system functioning that makes it possible for us to not have as many illnesses and to live longer and to have healthier lives. So we would say that in this particular time, this is a really good time to learn how to open your ears and to listen. And it's very simple. You just say back to the person who's talking what you heard them say, and then you don't comment on it. You don't say, well, that sucks, or
And
that doesn't make any sense.
may I add?
And Helen is going to add.
The phrase that I love the best is you mirror the person and say, to see if you got it, and say, did I get it? And then you say, is there more? And my favorite phrase is, well, that makes sense. Now, you may not agree with the person, but it makes sense to the person who said it. And once you say that makes sense, the other person really relaxes.
Yeah.
And so if you're in a family or in a group, one of the things you can I love how Harville tends to create structure around healthy relationships, and as a parent to intentionally in the group every day could be a different day that let's really learn about Joe. Take specific days and maybe make them a focus, and you can get a focus. It could be a day that people listen to you too, but sometimes structure is really important for clarity as people are wanting to learn to connect. It can help to have specific things around specific days.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that wasn't very clear.
Well, the idea of structure it's like listening is a skill, and all skills require structure because you have to do something over and over again, and you have to do it the right way. I want to tell the story about how we got into this, because in the middle 70s, middle 77, 78, along there, I had a practice of couples. And in those days, it's interesting that the way you helped couples in the 70s was help them solve problems, negotiate sort of contracts with each other for behavior, and communicate better. Basically, those were the three things. All of that had to do with helping couples talk. And so Helen and I had met, and we were dating, and this was not too long, far into that, 2 or 3 months into that. And we had a very I would say contentious relationship from the beginning. Now we would call it an intense relationship, but we weren't at that time skilled enough to manage this. So we were having a contentious talk, a little fight, and Helen interrupted our fight and said, "Let's stop." So Helen here invented what we now call dialogue. She said, "Let's stop. One of us talk, and the other one listen." Because what we were doing is what we would now call parallel monologues. That is, both of us were talking. We may have been taking turns talking, but neither one of us was listening. But most of the time, we were talking at the same time, and which is sort of normal and typical, but it got us into conflict. So we did stop. It stopped us, and we took turns. One of us talked, the other one listened, the other one listened, and then one talked and the other one listened. And it relaxed us. It just regulated our emotions so much so that I took this to the clinic where I was working with couples. And instead of having couples work on their problems, I began to train them to listen to each other about the problems rather than to just have them talk about their problems. And what I noticed was the better they learned to listen, and the more I could hold them into a listening stance, the more their problems went away. So, I'm a clinician, so I'm noticing what makes a difference. And what I notice is that what makes a difference is how well the couple listens to the other person while they're talking has to do with the decrease in anxiety and intensity. So we then developed out of that over the years this process of what we call dialogue, where you do take turns talking and listening in a very structured way. So to come back to the question, that stress will go down for anybody if they can experience themselves being listened to, because they at the same time experience themselves being seen. So no matter what comes up, the answer is listen to the other person and don't judge them or criticize them or comment on what they're saying. Just listen and say, hey, I get that. Am I getting that? Or you make sense. That really makes sense. And then is there more about that? And that something happens then that doesn't happen in any other way.
So, Carol, could I share a couple of things, just sort of a flow? So when you say something, like someone says something and then you want to react, but you think, well, I'll first listen. And you say, well, let me mirror what I think I heard you say. And I heard you say this, and did I get it? And is there more? All of that takes you to the upper brain, where instead of reacting to what they said, when you verbalize what you heard by mirroring them, it moves you into a calmer part of your brain. So from the very beginning of a dialogue process, you are freed up from anxiety. There's a way out of your anxiety if you've reacted in a negative way to what the person said. Like, I totally disagree with that. Like, instead of doing that, mirror, because for your sake, it puts you in the healthier part of your brain. I'll mention two things that we have found really helpful. Speaking of structure, if for anyone who's coupled, and you could even do this in a family or on in a work team, but as a couple, Harville and I, it was just about 4 years ago, we decided that every night before going to bed, one of us would take responsibility for making sure our relationship was connected before we went to bed. And the next day, the other person would be responsible. So I said, look, I'll do the odd days of the month. The first of the month, the third of the month, the fifth of the month, the seventh of the month, we're having a day and things are fine. And maybe there's a little rupture. It's my responsibility to make sure by the time we go to bed, we feel connected. Mm-hmm. On the second, on the fourth, on the sixth, on the eighth, it's his job. And I don't care what it takes. He has to figure out what will make sure we're connected. Flowers, chocolate, offering a foot rub. And so that kind of structure is fun. But if I may share one more thing, one of the big faults of mine being married to Harville is I like improving him. I love telling him that he could have done this better, or his wardrobe needs this, or da-da-da. And I do it for his sake, not mine, because I want him to do well. So I sacrifice and I don't even charge him, and I'm good with technical assistance.
Yeah, you were very generous to improve me.
And yes. He was miserable. He didn't want to be around me. And I'd say, hey, why don't we go for dinner? And go, I'm busy, because I'd been improving him during the day. And I hope no one out there is like me, because but I didn't know, because I thought I was being helpful and that he should appreciate that. And but I found out that Harville loved was me not knowing him instead of knowing him. And I have been practicing not knowing for about, oh, I don't know, 6 or 8 years. And I have a different brain. And I am so much calmer. Dan Siegel, the interpersonal neurobiologist, I was reading his handbook. And Carol, I know you know of Dan. Have you met him?
Yeah.
And he thinks healthy relationships create a healthy brain, as Harville and I do. I was reading one of his books, and there was just flipping through it, and there was a phrase, tolerating ambiguity is a sign of brain health. Carol, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Doesn't Dan know that being smart is a sign of brain health? What does he mean, tolerating ambiguity? But I read more, and he talks about the state of not knowing, when you can handle ambiguity. And there's, for those of you who don't know, I think many of you do, there's a lower brain, the reptilian brain that reacts spontaneously. Then there's the left brain hemisphere, logical, analytical. Architects are good with this, accountants, doctors. And there's a right brain knowing, which is an intuitive gut knowing. Between the two is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is the place of not knowing. And Dan says it's the Dalai Lama state. And when you're in the state of not knowing, which I call wondering, when you just wonder, this part of the brain releases acetylcholine or epinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, and neurochemicals that calm your body. And Mayo Clinic says that people with this neurochemical in their bloodstream, they live longer, they don't get sick as much, and they have a stronger immune system to fight off COVID. The lower brain is cortisol and adrenaline, and that's a toxic neurochemical. So the more you can avoid being upset and dwelling on what makes you mad about somebody, you're damaging your own body by staying frustrated. And it's a wonderful thing if you can shift. We use the phrase, shift from judgment to curiosity and wonder. Wonder, instead of judging why someone does something, get curious about it. And when I started doing that in my relationship with Harville, it was a wonderful transformation. And we now take walks, and instead of me telling him how he could have done some things better, I don't. I ask him how he's feeling and what did he do that day. And guess what, Carol? Recently, I don't even ask him questions. I just enjoy the silence.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. I'm going to do one last question between us before we move to the audience. I feel like you guys have given, not we, some good tools for living with people in your house. But what about people who are single right now and kind of dealing with loneliness by themselves? How do they kind of navigate this time?
Well, my comment about that is that it's to remember that we are social creatures and that we have to find a way to express our social needs. And being single sometimes amplifies that as a problem because you have nobody with whom you're living or close by. But so the first thing is that singles should not be alone. That is, they should find ways to interact, whether it's like a Zoom conference like we're having now, and to talk to people, to have human interaction as close to real time and as close to face as possible. And the Zoom feature has really added to the possibility of technological connecting, because text and phone calls are very different from a face-to-face, like we're having this face-to-face conversation now. So we would say to singles, have Zoom calls with anybody you can talk to. Call home, call a friend. If you're in a church or congregation of some sort and you have some social, or there are groups, go and be in them. Because as a creature, you need interaction with other human beings. And that is a built-in part of your reality.
Guess what I'm doing tonight?
What are you
Harville
doing
doesn't
tonight?
know this. I am having a Zoom call with 2 friends from 4th grade.
Oh my goodness.
And we happen
Yeah, I
to,
know who they are.
okay,
Yes.
we happen to have the birthday in February.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't see them any the rest of the year. But
Yeah.
anyway, it doesn't hurt to reach out to someone in the past and check in and see how they are.
Yeah. So, and I just wanted to push that we focus on listening so much as well as on talking, but learning how to talk so that people will listen. Because just to remember, we're social creatures. And I just want to push that. And therefore, all social impulses are normal. And that the needs are fundamental. So we have to find a way to satisfy them. So do it whatever mechanisms there are that are available to you. And if you only have text and phone, use them. But if you can get to Zoom connections, use them so that you have human interaction.
Love that. Thank you. All right. I think we're going to move over to getting our audience involved with us. And perhaps we've got about, a little less than 20 minutes. So maybe we take 10 minutes and people can raise their hand. If you raise your hand, we can pick you. Michelle is already raising her hand. Michelle Dupay. I don't know if I say that right. But the first part will just be sharing what's come up for you as you're hearing this with Harville and Helen. And then the second part we'll move to direct questions. Okay. So Michelle, go ahead.
I wanted to say all this resonates, and what cracks me up is that I remember the phrase class participation, and you're right, we got graded for class participation, and I wound up in a career of public relations, so I am very vocal, and I love my public policy issues, and it's been helpful to be reminded, because it's not like I didn't know, but it's good to be reminded about listening and taking a step back, because I think it was Lily Tomlin who joked the idea about people are just waiting for that lull in the conversation to interject. So when you were saying about not listening, it's the idea about who can fill up the space first. And the whole idea that my husband's in a nursing home, so I've already been dealing with being a pot of one. But I realized my friends really filled the gap. But now that I really am alone and it's harder to interact with people in person, what a difference, which is why then I signed on to this.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing.
That's great. Thank you. How about Melody?
I'm curious about loneliness within being a part of a couple. I feel like COVID has been so isolating, and we need more than just one another. I know one another is important, but how do we deal with feeling lonely within a couple during COVID?
What a powerful question, because I was thinking at the very beginning, loneliness, it doesn't mean you're living alone. You can feel lonely in a household with 6 people and no one. And I would say taking turns, making sure people are, in a couple, again, alternating days, and say, let's, why do we take turns? And every odd day of the month, I will say, Harville, is there anything I can do to improve our relationship? What I'd love to know. What is it that you might enjoy if I did it? And the next day, he would do it. And something where you take turns building a bridge. And people don't know to do that. It's a very simple thing. So I really appreciate your question.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, Helen, that um, that it's very simple what I want to say, but it's paradoxically powerful. Is that most couples have different styles of communicating, and so some want to talk more, some want to talk less. But both partners in any relationship have a fundamental human need, and that's to be heard. So sometimes the more talkative person is not listening, and the less talkative person is not listening. But so they're either not talking or talking too much. That is more than the other person wants. But if you can move toward the center so that the talkative person listens more and the non-talkative person talks more, and then you create something, because loneliness is a feeling of not being connected to the person you're with. And it's only through listening that you can experience connecting. And that's why we say we're social beings. We must experience connecting, or we will feel lonely and we might also get sick. It's serious business, this thing that we're social creatures and the need to be in connection with each other. So it's sort of stretching into being there with each other, being present for the other is the thing that will fix that.
Thank you.
Cool. We have about 11 minutes left, so we're going to, anyone who has questions or anything, and this I feel like you guys answered a little bit right now. This is a question from Facebook. Our online community is listening to you guys right now too. How do you maintain intimacy in lockdown? And I kind of feel like you guys just gave a couple of really good tools right there. So why don't we go to Shoshana Levinson?
Okay, am I unmuted? I'm unmuted now. All right. Something that I feel is missing here is the whole idea of self-soothing. You know, I am married to a wonderful man. We are grateful every single day. In particular, in this pandemic, that we speak to each other lovingly almost every single day. And yeah, we have arguments, but I am curious because, as someone stated earlier, whether you're married or not, you can feel lonely, whether you have a partner or you're living alone. So I know, Harville, you talked about it being, you know, we think that we should do it ourselves, but we can't. Well, what are some simple ways for people to hold the loneliness and be able to soothe themselves? Maybe picking up the phone is the way, but are there other things? I mean, meditation, positive thinking, you know, a few ideas would be really, really appreciated.
Because so many people want to speak also, that's a very profound question. So let me do a quick answer and then we'll move on. Yes, there's meditation. Yes, there's spiritual retreat and things like that. What I love is meditating on Harville's words. And to me, I use him as my spiritual practice, and that's what he does also.
Huh.
Why don't we move to other questions? I
Yeah.
hate to cut you off, but I mean, I hope that that's enough of an answer for right now. I go to Omega sessions.
All right, so how about Tina G?
Hi, I just want to say, I bought your book like 30 years ago and really helped me in my marriage. We're now married 38 years and we've used some of the techniques that you guys have taught us. I just wanted to comment on what you just said before about repeating back to the person when you're listening and saying those words like, oh, that makes sense. Because sometimes it doesn't. And a good friend of mine said, you know what you could say? Maybe you're right.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
maybe. And that's it. It makes sense means I see the sense you're making. I actually
Yeah.
agree with you. I have a
Yeah,
different perspective that makes sense to me, but the you make sense is I see the sense you're making.
Yeah.
yeah, but sometimes I don't. So it's better to just say, maybe you're right. But it's the same principle. It's the same principle, and I just want to thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing that with the group.
Great. And next, Sandy?
Yeah, I have a different kind of question. People are talking about questions within their relationships. My question is, I have had very few relationships in my life, and they've never lasted longer than a few months. So my question is, how does one go about getting in a relationship? I don't even know how to do that. And it's been a lot of years since I've even been in any kind of relationship. So, of course, being in this lockdown, I mean, I guess it's a little more tricky, but honestly, even before that, I wasn't. And so I would like to know, what's the trick? I mean, I guess you probably have to be open to a certain extent and make eye contact and different things that apparently I'm not doing. But yeah, that would be my question.
Okay. So can I give a quick response to that? There's one thing that's really sexy, which is curiosity. And um, the parallel thing I want to say to that is everybody's different. So if you're looking for a relationship, you have to know that when you meet or see anybody, they're going to be different. Like the validation piece we were just talking about, everybody has an inner world that makes sense to them.
Mhm.
And if you
Maybe they're right.
and if you criticize their inner world, then you're abusing them because their world makes sense to them. Your world makes sense to you. They don't have to be the same thing. But the way to bridge difference, which is real and will never go away because difference is the nature of every human being, is different from
Mhm.
every inner world, is different from every other inner world, similar in many ways, but fundamentally different. Curiosity is the way to bridge that. And curiosity can become, but if you want to, if you size them up and say, well, we don't see things the same way, well,
Mhm.
nobody sees things the same way.
Yeah.
That's dismissing people because they are themselves. But when
Mhm.
you're curious about their uniqueness, then that makes them safe and that makes you attractive.
Mhm. So don't like discard people too quickly because they're different, or
Right?
just, oh, I'm not interested in them, or
Be,
or
be curious because they have a whole world you've never been in, which is their world. And if
Mhm.
you're curious, you can cross the bridge into their world and you might say, oh, so that's what it's like for you when X happens. Uh, so like Helen and I have radically different views about vacations. One of our classic answers is that Helen likes to stay home, and she's a homebody. She roams the universe with her mind, but she likes to stay home. I like to travel. I'm a wanderer. And so for many years, that was a conflict for us until we learned what we're talking about here now, which is the difference creates the possibility for creativity that would create something that you couldn't create by yourself. Because it's like it takes two people to create a baby, and one person can't. So it takes two people to create a novelty. So we were talking about this for probably 2 or 3 years, and finally came up with the idea: why don't we buy a motorhome for our vacations? She's at home in the motorhome, and that was fine with her because she's sitting over there and she's doing her thing. I'm wandering because I'm driving it.
And I get to drive too
And
sometimes.
then she
But
got interested in motorhoming,
I like
and
to
I got
flop on the
interested in
bed
being
in the
settled.
back. So
So it's
Yeah, but how do you get past even the first date, or just even eye contact with someone? Like right now, like it's been years since I've been in any kind of relationship. Like forget the motorhome. I'm just like, how do you make things grow. Like everyone, seems to be I mean, many relationships may not be very good. Or like the other woman who said she's in a relationship, but she's still lonely, which I understand that. But for me, it's like I feel like there's another language that most people know that I just don't know. Like how to even accomplish this thing that lasts for more than a week, 2 weeks, a few months. Like, there that I don't know, like sometimes I probably should see a therapist. But the funny thing is my three siblings have never had long-term relationships either. So I think there's probably some psychological variant going on.
With
Because
them,
that's weird that
maybe, but before you go into it being a pathology, I would say
yeah, no one wants to be a pathology.
it may be
Yeah.
technology, and I would suggest that you find a way to be with somebody. You can go to dating sites and all that to meet somebody. Practice curiosity and deep listening and see what happens. Right?
Okay, but I thought that was funny that you said that before you leap into becoming a pathology. That was funny because I guess that's where I was going with that. But yeah, no, I mean that might not be a good thing to think about yourself, really.
No, you shouldn't. You should think about it as a skill I can learn. And you can learn how to say, so tell me more about that. So when that happened, what happened? Wow, that's really interesting. Is there more about it? Gee whiz. Wow, that really makes sense. Is there more? So you're curious. So the person doesn't see you as a challenge. They see you as interested. And that's very sexy. Somebody's interested in me, what I'm saying, but listen accurately and don't judge it. Never judge it. Listen accurately and say, wow, I get that.
I
Then
mean, except for like if someone's clearly not your type, then there are times when you need to judge it.
there are personality things. So we're gonna have to leave that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sandy.
Send you a-
I think we have reached our time. So that was our final question. And one of the things I love about Harville and Helen is that I have learned over the years with them that you don't have to be great at this when you go in. There are skills that all of us can learn in communication. They've mentioned a few of them with us today. If it's really being a good listener, if it's taking turns with a partner and one person is responsible each day for making sure the other feels really seen. I want you guys to know, for those of you who are in couples, whether married or just as a pair, we do have their program coming to an online course at the end of this month. It's the weekend of February 26th to the 28th. Because we couldn't have them on campus with us this past year, we really wanted to be able to offer the course that we normally offer. So the hours are set up a little differently, but they definitely will come and bring and teach online. They've been doing it already several times last year, and it's well attended. People are getting just as much out of it. And so for those of you who feel like you want to learn more, you are welcome to join. And I'm sure that you could either go to the Omega website, or there's probably a link over here in the chat to the course itself. So Harville and Helen, thank you both so much for joining us today. And thank you all for being here. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions. We probably could have just taken the whole hour having people ask questions, but thank you all for your time, and look forward to seeing you at the end of the month.
We will be
Yes,
there.
we're excited.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much for having us. It's always an honor. We have
No.
such a long history together.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thanks to all of you for coming, and we'll see you down the path. Bye-bye for now.